My manager tried to steal my commission and got blacklisted. I used to work in sales for a luxury car dealership. It was a commission-based job, which meant every sale counted, and the competition was fierce. My manager, Steve, was a guy who made your skin crawl, constantly trying to take credit for our hard work. But he took things too far when he outright stole a $10,000 commission from me. One day, a wealthy client came in looking to purchase 3 high-end vehicles for his family. I spent weeks working with this client, building trust, and handling every single detail of the sale. The day we closed the deal, I was out of the office running an errand. When I got back, Steve casually told me that he had taken care of it and put the sale under his name. I was livid. He smiled and said, "Better luck next time, kid." I knew I couldn't confront him directly without risking my job, so I hatched a plan. I started quietly documenting everything shady he did. It turned out this wasn't the first time Steve had stolen commissions or fudged numbers to benefit himself. I even overheard him bragging about it to one of his friends on the phone. I compiled every bit of evidence I could find: emails, sales logs, even customer complaints where he'd taken credit for sales he had no involvement in. Then, I took it a step further. One night, I stayed late at the dealership and accidentally left a stack of damning papers on the desk of the regional director, who was scheduled to visit the next morning. The next day, the director found the documents and started an investigation. Steve had no idea what hit him. It turns out Steve's actions had cost the dealership a lot more than just my commission. He had been skimming from multiple deals over the past year, inflating his numbers and pocketing commissions that should have gone to other salespeople. The dealership fired him on the spot, and I received a very nice check for my stolen commission, as well as a public apology from management. But the best part, Steve was blacklisted from the industry. And last I heard, he was working as a used car salesman at a shady lot across town. Funny how things work out. Second story, my professor tried to ruin my degree. During my senior year in college, I took a class with a professor who was notorious for being tough, but he had a particular vendetta against me. I wasn't sure why, maybe because I challenged his viewpoints during discussions, or maybe just because he didn't like my major. Regardless, he made my life a living hell. He would grade my papers more harshly than others, call me out in class for minor mistakes, and even tried to make me look incompetent during presentations. The final straw came when he failed me on a group project that I had practically carried on my own. This project was worth 40% of the final grade, and failing it meant I would fail the class, jeopardizing my graduation. I knew I couldn't let this happen, so I started gathering evidence. I spoke with my group members, who were more than willing to vouch for my contributions to the project. I also compared my work with other students who received higher grades for lower quality work. I even managed to record one of his rants during class where he made personal attacks on me rather than critiquing my work. Then, I filed a formal complaint with the university, presenting all my evidence. But I didn't stop there. I did some digging and found that this professor had a history of complaints from other students, though none had ever been taken seriously. I reached out to some of them, and together, we submitted a joint complaint. The university launched an investigation, and it wasn't long before they found a pattern of biased grading and unprofessional behavior on his part. He was suspended pending further review, and I was allowed to retake the class with another professor. Not only did I pass, but I graduated with honors. As for the professor, he was quietly let go the next semester. Apparently, he had been on thin ice for years, and my case was the one that finally broke through. Poetic justice, if you ask me. Third story, my wedding photographer tried to scam me. My husband and I hired what we thought was a reputable photographer for our wedding. The contract was simple. We would pay him a portion up front and the rest after the wedding when we received the edited photos and video. He came highly recommended, but after the wedding, things went south fast. He showed up late to the wedding, missed key moments like my dad walking me down the aisle, and was rude to our guests. But the worst part, after the wedding, he ghosted us. Months passed, and we still didn't have any of our wedding photos or video. We tried calling, emailing, even sending messages through social media. Nothing. We were devastated. After doing some research, we found out this guy had pulled similar stunts before taking the initial deposit, showing up just enough to claim he did the job, and then disappearing with the rest of the payment. We were heartbroken, but I wasn't about to let this scam artist get away with it. I started by posting in local wedding groups online, warning others about his scam. Soon, I was contacted by several other couples who had experienced the same thing. We formed a small group and decided to take legal action. One of the couples happened to be lawyers, which was a huge win for us. But here's where the revenge part comes in. While waiting for the legal process to play out, I got creative. I found his personal website, where he advertised his photography services and submitted a review complete with screenshots of his ghosting, examples of his terrible work from our wedding, and links to the complaints filed by other couples. I also found his social media accounts and shared the review in the comments of his posts. Pretty soon, his entire online presence was flooded with negative reviews and warnings from all of us. Within a month, his business was in ruins. He had to shut down his website, delete his social media accounts, and by the time we got to court, he was practically begging to settle. We got a full refund plus compensation for emotional distress, and last I heard, he's no longer in the wedding photography business at all. Fourth story, the friendly neighbor who tried to steal my land. A few years ago, my wife and I moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood. We bought a nice little house at the end of a cul-de-sac, and everything seemed perfect until we met our neighbor Paul. Paul was one of those people who tried to seem super friendly but was always looking for a way to take advantage of others. At first, he'd do small things like borrow tools and forget to return them. He'd park in front of our house even though his driveway was always empty. Annoying, but nothing that couldn't be dealt with. I let it slide, thinking I didn't want to stir up unnecessary drama with a neighbor. Then one day, I noticed some surveyor flags in our backyard right along the property line. I thought, that's odd, we didn't order a survey. When I asked Paul about it, he shrugged and said he was having his property surveyed for future improvements and not to worry about it. A few weeks later, I came home to find a small construction crew in my backyard laying down concrete slabs. Paul had decided to expand his driveway onto my property. I was in shock. I confronted him immediately, and he claimed that the land between our houses actually belonged to him, based on the survey he'd commissioned. I knew something wasn't right. My wife and I had the property lines clearly outlined in our home purchase documents, and I was certain Paul was trying to pull something shady. When I showed him the original survey from when we bought the house, he smirked and said, "Well, my survey says otherwise. Guess we'll have to let the courts figure it out." That's when I realized he was trying to bully me into giving up part of my land, betting that I wouldn't want to deal with the hassle or legal fees of fighting him. He was in for a rude awakening. I started by hiring my own surveyor, who confirmed what I already knew. Paul was encroaching on my property, but I wasn't going to stop there. I knew Paul had money and could drag this out in court, so I decided to play a different game, one he wouldn't see coming. While I was getting my survey done, I spent some time at the county records office and discovered something interesting. Paul had done this before. He had moved into the neighborhood about 10 years earlier and pulled the same stunt with another neighbor, trying to claim a strip of their land. In that case, he had settled out of court after the neighbor backed down. It was a pattern he'd use his wealth and legal threats to bully people into giving up their property. I also noticed Paul had a history of doing work on his house without the necessary permits. I filed a formal complaint with the city's building department, which triggered a full investigation. But I wasn't done yet. I also discovered that the survey Paul had used to claim my land was conducted by a fly-by-night operation, one that wasn't even licensed in our state. Armed with this information, I decided to give Paul a taste of his own medicine. First, I filed a lawsuit, not just to force him to remove the concrete slabs from my property, but also for damages due to trespassing and property destruction. I also reported him to my homeowner's insurance, who immediately went after him for the potential liabilities of his illegal construction. But the real kicker came when the city finally caught up with him. They not only fined Paul for the unpermitted work on his house, but they also forced him to tear down part of his illegally built garage, which, as it turns out, also encroached on city property. The fines alone ran into the tens of thousands. The court battle over the property didn't last long either. With the legitimate survey in hand, the judge ruled in my favor, and Paul was forced to pay for the removal of the slabs, legal fees, and a hefty penalty for trying to claim land that wasn't his. He also got a permanent black mark on his property title, which made it a nightmare for him when he eventually tried to sell his house. But the best part, the whole neighborhood found out about Paul's antics, and he became a pariah. People stopped talking to him, his once pristine reputation was in ruins, and he eventually moved out in disgrace. Paul thought he could bully me into giving up my land, but in the end, he lost far more than just a few feet of property. He lost his standing in the community, thousands of dollars, and even his home.